In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Nathan Lutz, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies and knights to the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Russell Guest, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host from deep in the heart of Texas, Mr. Dustin Melbardis. How you doing, sir?
Good afternoon. I'm doing great. I'm excited about this movie, ready to get into it. We've got a fun guest as well.
I'm feeling extra retro. I feel like the 80s just exudes more retro than other decades, and so we called in a pro, somebody who really can bring us the retro vibes of the 80s from the All 80s Movies podcast, Mr. Jason Masek. How you doing, sir?
I am doing most excellent. Russell and Dustin, what a pleasure it is to be guest hosting on your podcast. Wow, you're propping me up here. I hope I deliver. I hope I can bring the right stuff to your podcast.
Yeah, and so as one of the great authorities of the 80s, what made you want to do an All 80s Movies podcast?
Well, you know what? I'm going to give you a little bit of history, actually. My co-host and great friend, Bill Bant, and we go back to the University of Miami, Florida, where we both film students in the mid to late 90s, actually. And then our friendship matured, and I'm grateful to say it became a working relationship after we had both moved out to the LA area. And, you know, we were part of a small independent production team working on some successful short films. And then, you know, cut to a few years later, we're just sitting around the table, speaking of round table, having dinner, and all we do is talk about movies, right? And this is common amongst all of us film buffs, our, community of movie nerds. And Bill said to me, hey, we should turn this into a podcast. And I have to give credit to another friend of ours named Marwan, who planted a seed as well a few years back by listening to the growing trend of film podcasts at the time. And we started discussing the format, what our niche would be, and we landed on the 80s. To answer your initial question, that decade, those were the formative years for us, which developed our fascination with filmmaking and the magic of movies, I mean, plainly said. And so now, we look back each week to a different film of the 80s, discuss our earliest memories, our attachments, lasting effects, the nostalgia. And then, we discuss how we interpret the films today. It's meant to be fun and a relatable process, and we hope that the people of our generation can really appreciate it. Obviously, we do it for a lot of those listeners, but it's also nice to be able to inspire the younger generation, or maybe the older generation, to discover the movies of the 80s for the very first time.
I really enjoy doing movies from the 80s, and I think it's really cool that you can draw in and dive in and see connections from week to week by immersing yourself so deeply in the 80s. And I got to say, you and Bill have a nice quality of that camaraderie that you said you had there. It shows. If you like the Retro Movie Roundtable at all, I definitely would check out the All 80s Movies podcast. Now, this is a movie with a great ensemble cast. Now, Jason, what's one of your favorite ensemble casts from a movie?
Russell, gentlemen, I love this question because there are so many great films out there with ensemble casts, great films, great television shows. And I have such an immense respect for any filmmaker that attempts the undertaking of creating something with such a large cast, because it's such a delicate balance. So from every aspect of filmmaking, you really, really have to pay attention to every actor and all the details. So regardless, there are the usual suspects regarding films with ensemble casts, ranging from, speaking of the 80s, The Big Chill, all the way to more recent films like Ocean's 11 and beyond.
That's a good one.
But funny enough, Bill and I, on our pod, were just doing Body Heat, and that is by one of my favorites, writer-director Lawrence Kasdan. And during our discussion of Body Heat, we came across Silverado, and that is my choice.
Yeah.
That's a great choice. That's a great
Silverado, man. Yeah, right? I'm a fan of Westerns to begin with, but this was one of the earlier films that I can remember that had a murderer's row of a cast. So I'm just going to list it off real quick if you'll indulge me. Kevin Kline, Scott Glenn, Kevin Costner, Danny Glover, Brian Dennehy, Rosanna Arquette, John Cleese, Jeff Goldblum, Linda Hunt, Jeff Fahey, Richard Jenkins, and great character actor Brian James.
It's a lot of fun. I feel like neo-Westerns tend to be on the more serious side, and that one is just fun with a capital F. So we covered that one here on this show, and it was It was a good time. So
oh man, I've got to look back in your catalog.
I'm on that episode.
Yeah,
I got to say, I believe Brian James was someone who caught my attention. My first ever episode of Retro Movie Roundtable was Blade Runner. And
of course.
So Blade Runner, I immediately saw Brian James again. Absolutely great cast.
Extremely entertaining. I love Kevin Costner in that as that young hotshot gunslinger. And also, we got a little crossover here.
Little
with the
crossover.
Right stuff.
That's right.
Scott Glenn and Jeff Goldblum. It's great stuff.
That is, yes. The Pittsburgh's own Jeff Goldblum. He's awesome.
Ah, there you go.
Now, Dustin, what about you? What's an ensemble cast that just comes to the surface for you?
The first thing I thought of was Ocean's 11, actually, but I'm going to go with Armageddon. Armageddon was probably the first, look at everyone here. Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, Michael Clarke Duncan, Buscemi, Peter Stormare, and then other people
Tyler?
that I've liked in other things too, like Jason Isaacs is in that movie.
Yeah. Will Patton.
Will Patton. Keith David, incredible voice actor in the later part of his career. Like all these people. And then, of course, Liv Tyler, that was kind of my introduction to her. So Armageddon's my pick for this question.
I just think the Lord of the Rings trilogy did an amazing job at their casting. They had literary characters that people knew, and they just breathed life into them so well, and they all play together so well and off of each other so well. So Lord of the Rings for me.
Great choice.
Now, what's the last movie you saw? It doesn't have to be in theaters, but just in general. Jason.
I just watched The French Dispatch the other night, and it was an interesting watch. I was watching it with an older gentleman, a good friend of mine, and it was, sometimes the viewing experience is affected, obviously, by with whom you watch the movie. And I think he was trying to make heads or tails of it. Sometimes Wes Anderson, it's a particular taste. And my review is basically, I liked it. I respect it. I don't love it. But that's just my opinion. From a storytelling perspective, I found some of it engaging and engrossing, but not all of it. I am a fan of Wes Anderson. I think he's a true auteur. And from the artistic perspective, without a doubt, I mean, the set design, production design, frame, composition, movement, the dialogue, I mean, it's unassailable. It's undeniably smart stuff. And it made me realize that I need to go back in his filmography and really do a little more work. I got to watch a lot more of his films in their entirety, not just bits and pieces. And lastly, I'll just say I'm a huge Bottle Rocket fan. So
I think with Wes Anderson, it's nice to know that when you revisit his stuff, you can also just say you're revisiting good movies instead of just, well, it's on the list, so I have to watch it.
Dustin, what was your last movie?
I wanted to listen to an episode of the All 80s Movies podcast, so I watched The Breakfast Club, which I had seen a bunch of times. I think my introduction to it was sometime in the 90s, like on TBS. But it's one that I've seen a dozen times, and just a masterpiece.
I love that movie, despite its disturbing lack of breakfast in the movie.
There it is. There it is.
And my last movie that I saw was Lawless from 2012. And Jessica Chastain just recently won Best Actress Award, and I had recently seen her role as Tammy Faye. And so this is one that I had missed from her catalog. I'm a fan of her, so I just went back up and picked this one up. Great cast. I like the world that they put you in. I can't say the journey they take you on is as good as the world that they put you in, but there's some good things here too. So today, Dustin, what movie are we going to do?
The Right Stuff from 1983.
Oh.
Yikes, of course. Of course.
The Right Stuff.
Amazing.
I had to. I couldn't get through the whole episode. But
I'm not mad at you.
I'm glad we got it out of the way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Russ.
The Right Stuff Stars Charles Frank, Scott Glenn, Ed Harris, Lance Henriksen, barely any Lance Henriksen, Scott Pauline, Dennis Quaid, Sam Shepard, Fred Ward, Kim Staley, Barbara Hershey, Veronica Cartwright, and Pamela Reid. It's a loaded cast of people, but at the time there aren't necessarily a lot of people who are well known from it. It comes out in 1983. It's budgeted for $27 million. It only grosses $21.1 million domestically. That is less money than it was made. That is its international grossings, its rentals, and its other things go on to make it money. So it's not a total flop, but it is a disappointment given what they put into it. It places at 33 on the box office that year. It comes in behind Class and ahead of Cujo. And the number one movie from 1983 was Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. IMDb gives The Right Stuff a 7.8. That seems low. And the critics of Rotten Tomatoes love it. They give it a 96%. And then an audience score of 90%. And so the Rotten Tomatoes crew is liking it a lot more. It is an Academy Award winner 4 times for Best Film Editing, Original Score, Sound, and Sound Effects Editing. And it's nominated for 4 more Oscars for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor, Best Art Direction, and Best Cinematography. And it is a Golden Globes nominee for Best Motion Picture Drama. So, Jason, tell people at home, was this your first time with The Right Stuff? What was your introduction to it, and how did it go down for you?
Gosh. This was not my first time seeing this film. I have seen it several times. And first off, I just wanted to ask you both, is there enough testosterone in this movie? Is there enough?
It does not pass the Bechdel test.
No.
What I can say is that I don't recall seeing it in the theater, but most likely it was a cable watch. I must have been anywhere from 12 to 14 years old. I know I enjoyed it, partially because I watched it with my dad, who was a pilot in the Air Force. He actually trained on the T-38 Talon. He flew the C-130 Herky Bird carriers in Vietnam. And also, I just had a fascination with the space program as a kid. But it was a 3-hour movie, and although I appreciated the historical significance, it was just damn tough to beat out that Star Wars or Indiana Jones franchise from an entertainment standpoint. As a kid, I just wanted laser blasters and lightsabers and adventures seeking treasure.
It's hard to beat laser blasters. I see
right?
What you're saying.
Yeah. So, I most likely haven't seen it in its entirety for at least, probably 10, 15 years. I know I've seen different sequences at different points more recently than that. However, I've remembered so much from this film, lines of dialogue, certain shots, cuts. It was great. I obviously have an affinity and attachment to this movie because for over 3-hour long running time, I remembered most of it.
Wow. And Dustin, how about you? What was your background with this one?
Listeners of the podcast will know that there was no chance that I had actually seen this movie before, but that's every movie that we do. I've never seen these. So my first watch of it was 2 days ago. I saw the runtime, and I thought to myself, do I need to split this up into 2 viewings to actually enjoy it, or do I just power all the way through? And I powered all the way through. And the movie made it easy for me to do that. When I have the opportunity to watch something new, I try to learn as little about it as I possibly can. That being said, in conversation, I brought up that for the podcast, I'm about to do The Right Stuff. And I think we all have those friends. Jason, you mentioned that your dad was a pilot, but we all have those friends who were super interested in space, had a couple of college buddies who it was essentially, no, I'm going to work for NASA, or this was all been a waste of time. So a couple of buds living in Florida, working in NASA, now living in Texas. I've got a bunch of buddies who, you can't walk down the street 10 feet without meeting someone from Houston. And it's such a big cultural thing here in Texas to be proud of the space program. So when I'm bringing up this movie, there are some people that say, oh, yeah, love it. Maybe one of my top 10 favorite movies. And so I'd have to tell them, well, don't tell me anything about it yet. Let me watch it and record on the podcast, then we'll talk about it later. All I heard were good things, and that was my experience, were good things with The Right Stuff.
And for me, I'm actually going to join you on this one. It's not a movie that I had seen before, and I wasn't sure what to get into. I admittedly will say the long run time and just the biographical kind of true story kind of thing. I didn't dive into it. I was aware of it being out there, but I never came to it. And this is one of those cool things. The pick came our way, and I picked it up, and it was so good I just said, wow, I can't feel bad. I've turned it down more than once, and just partially because of the runtime. And I wish I had given it its dues sooner, because this is a very good movie. It's something that covers such a broad range of emotions and spectrums that it's doing a lot of things at one time. And I think that an epic movie has the framework to be able to do that in. And if it wasn't so long, it couldn't do that. So
yeah, it better. For 193 minutes, it better cover all of those. Yeah. I want to ask real quick, even just bringing up the name of the movie, The Right Stuff, I almost thought, like, is this the best name for it? It didn't seem to fit with me when I was going into it. I guess, yeah, the movie does explain what it is, but do you guys think The Right Stuff is like the appropriate title for this movie? That's
a good question.
I would have completely passed it up. I almost feel as if it needed some type of more like nonfiction style title or something like that. Did that cross your mind?
One of these days, right to the moon.
Right to the moon.
That's an excellent question I hadn't even thought of. And of course, I've known this movie or about this movie for, a couple decades here, a few decades. And so I only associate this title with this movie. Uh-huh. But now I'm trying to come up with alternate titles. And it's a great question. And it makes sense.
Right. Like I'm thinking to
why
myself,
wouldn't you just call it Mercury 7 or
right? I'd love that.
Demon in the Sky.
That's cool.
Oh my
too.
God, that's a great title.
Yeah, Aboriginal Fireflies. Phrase. Who knows what it could be? But it almost seems as if this doesn't, like the title doesn't fit. I'm not knocking the movie for it, but I think it's maybe one of the reasons I had missed it. Was it just didn't really fit. Now I don't want it to swing the other way. Like I don't want space cowboys. Now we got Jason mentioned the testosterone in this movie. I don't want Top Gun. It almost seems as if it was mistitled or something.
That's a very good point, and perhaps it would have made millions more dollars with a better title. So and we did talk about that, but we were going to get into a lot more here after the other side of the break. There will be spoilers that lie ahead, so please check out The Right Stuff, and then we'll be back after these messages.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason, and this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments, too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
All right, we're back, and Dustin, for those who haven't seen The Right Stuff since 1983, do you want to refresh people's memory?
This is the story about the first American astronauts, but it takes us a little while to get there. We focus first on Edwards Air Force Base, where Chuck Yeager and other test pilots push the envelope on what is humanly possible, chasing that demon in the sky to break the sound barrier. Once that goal is hit, these men aim their sights higher, farther, and faster. It is a place that attracts those who are willing to volunteer to advance tech, science, and public opinion in the years following the Second World War. From this group, we meet Gordo, Gus, and Deke, along with pilots from the other armed services, John, Alan, Scott, and Wally. Through rigorous physical and mental testing, our Mercury 7 astronauts are selected to much fanfare, as pressure from the top brass, politically, and the competing Russians spins into a media frenzy to get into space. The monkey is sent up first, but then the cosmonauts send up a manned rocket. We push to get a man in orbit as Jeff Goldblum and a cavalcade of German scientists assists to keep America ahead of the game. Our focus turns to the personal lives of these men and their pressures with their families and their wives. As one of our first astronauts breaches the atmosphere, attempt to keep their home lives afloat, form a camaraderie that had never before been dramatized on film about the Mercury 7. Upon the relocation from Cape Canaveral to Houston, the media hype by Texas's own LBJ concludes as we send the last solo man to orbit the Earth. while Chuck and the earthbound pilots of yesteryear continue to revel in their own speed contributions as progress marches on.
Yeah. So this covers an enormous time span. Jason, what was your take in just how this story is being told? Like, we're covering a lot. Like, it's not just the sound barrier. It's not just going to space. It's not just, this movie is covering everything. How did you determine what's in and what's out?
Wow. Great question. I thought the screenplay was really smart. It's interesting because now as an adult, I'm watching this and I want to know actually more of the science and a bit more of the personal drama that some of these men had to endure, that their families had to endure. But interestingly enough, is 3 hours even long enough to cover what they had to cover in this? And that's it's so much. And I thought that, some of the things that I crave now as an adult might be better served in a series, which, funny enough, we have the right stuff now on Disney+. But then even number two, I'm not sure that some of these things that I want, these minute details or things that I'm interested in as an adult, would have been as interesting or stimulating in this format, in a feature film format, as a visual meeting, and have to cover, like you said, such an expanse of time and history. And, if you were only focusing on one aspect of the story, one man or woman or relationship or scientific aspect, maybe that would make it something interesting for a smaller film. But this is an epic feature. And for this type of grand scope, you've got to keep things moving. And I thought Philip Kaufman did a great job. I mean, my point is with the screenplay, I think at times some of it does sound a bit simplified. I would not go as far as to say that it was dumbed down for the audience, but it is definitely made more palatable. And there is some comic relief in there. There's humorous moments. There are characters that fulfill that comic relief role. But I can't fault Kaufman for that. This has to be serve an entertainment purpose. I think, if I had to nitpick, my issue might be that some of the quote unquote on the ground scenes felt a little bit drawn out. They're very important scenes and establish perspective, emotion, time period. But some of the actual shots, in my humblest of opinions, could have been trimmed. But that's really nitpicking. I think this is based on Thomas Wolfe's novel, and I've never read the book. But from some of the research, it sounds like they stayed somewhat close, which is impressive. So not only are you covering such a huge time period, but now this is basically an adapted screenplay, correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
Wolf wasn't that happy with the results of the movie, unfortunately, but perhaps to each their own, because the Mercury 7 didn't love his book, and therefore they didn't love this movie either. So the more times you take it away from the reality, the more discontented they became. But, you're making a movie. We've had this conversation before, like Braveheart, when we did that movie, nothing's accurate, but it's an interesting movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to make these characters likable for the time frame that they're in the movie, to your point, Jason. And it is a lot to take on. So
absolutely, yeah. They're going to have to take some liberties. There's going to be some dramatic license taken here. And, the entire Chuck Yeager storyline was almost not in this. I mean, you had William Goldman, one of our best screenwriters in the history of cinema, pen the original screenplay. And then Chuck Yeager wasn't even in the story. So now we have this, which Philip Kaufman gave us, which obviously very much incorporates the Chuck Yeager storyline. And for me, in my opinion, is one of the most attractive things about the movie, actually.
I have to agree with you there completely. Yeah. Is that now, before the break, we did mention a couple times the runtime. And I think without the Chuck Yeager part of it, I think if I remember, as I was watching 2 days ago, I think it's 58 minutes before we even make the pivot to the word astronaut. Like, you would think we're 2/3 of the way through a plane movie, through a fighter jet movie.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's not uncomfortable, but it's just sort of like whirlwind. And now we're gonna start a new movie in the middle of this one about picking astronauts from test pilots. And we do see a little bit of the decision to do that with Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum's characters, the recruiters, and talking to sort of the dark room of whether that's the Joint Chiefs or the top brass, whatever it is. So we do kind of like make that pivot pretty late, but I think I respect the decision to keep it all. You know, on this podcast, we've talked about like the amount of money that's spent on stuff that ends up being cut, throwback to the Little Shop of Horrors episode and the alternate ending. But when we think of the decision to just keep it all, no, there's no director's cut. This is it. You get it all.
Right.
It does feel like a director's cut.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
There is no shorter version of this. You get it all, and luckily you don't get bored during it. You don't feel. I don't remember feeling much of a fatigue.
I think this movie wanted to be a trilogy. I think Hollywood would have hated me because they didn't make enough money on this one to make two more. But I think it would have been really interesting to have a very strong Chuck Yeager focus in the first movie, and to go to the Mercury 7 in the second movie. And to your point, Jason, I feel like there's much of the story. They give you a paragraph at the end of this where we lose Gus Grissom in space.
Right.
That's
right.
a tragedy that I feel like I've become so invested in these characters. I feel like I need to feel that. We have established that this is a dangerous thing. This movie opens up on a wife being told, we're sorry, your husband didn't make it. This is dangerous stuff. And I think feeling that loss is a strong blow that we should face. And furthermore, I think there should be a third movie where the space race in many ways, at least as from our American standpoint, is culminates in going to the moon. And I would like to see the going to the moon part of the story that we don't see here. And I think that's enough for 3 movies, 3 stout movies, I might add. And I think that the Chuck Yeager character can make appearances in these other things. And I think that the world should all connect in with each other. But I think a more ambitious, which this was super ambitious, but I think you could be more expansive, is my point.
Well, and the camera loves Sam Shepard.
Yeah,
I mean,
I can't wait to talk about that. Oh my goodness.
It was returning to how the movie started. Russell, you mentioned that like we have to understand how dangerous this is, or the ambition of these men. And I'm saying men in this context because at this time period and the focus of the movies is the men who make these decisions, and they are accompanied by their wives. And I mean, the kids are barely in this at all. So it is just sort of focusing on the ambition of men to break records. Every time a record's broke, Chuck Yeager is going to go back up there and do it again. It's almost a frame story where, all right, well, after this astronaut stuff happens, after the space race takes off, we do get from his other captain friend, the one who's always there with a stick of gum, to
Ridley.
Ridley, thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're there to see him take off in a jet one final time. I mean, we were talking a little bit about trimming, but we almost could have just had him take off and had the movie fade away. Now, Russell, you said that we get that little voiceover paragraph by our narrator about, well, and then Gus died in fire. Wow, it's almost abrupt. Yeah. And then credits roll.
But it's still a very happy tone, too, like with the patriotic. it's like, and by the way, Gus died.
It's that I can also agree with. It's a strange way to put a period on this movie. It's a little bit emotionally all over the place. And I was like, okay, so now we just go watch From the Earth to the Moon, I guess, the Tom Hanks, which is on HBO right now, which is great. But it's like, what? You're just going to leave us with that? Where do we go? What am I supposed to do with that?
I have an answer to that.
I'm not done. I will block out another hour. I'll stay here for a 4th hour. You come back and you finish this.
I think there's something wonderful about us, about how the movie holds up, and about us in dating the podcast in 2022. I love the idea that what's next for us? Spending 2 hours last night reading about every astronaut. That's what I'm doing. Wow. I want now, in 1983, I mean, shoot, just, 15 years ago, we didn't have the access to just pull up all this stuff at once. And as we mentioned, there's now a series out about this, but I spent a significant amount of time learning about this stuff, and it's great.
The more you know. You can't cut the Chuck Yeager part out of this, though. Kaufman is right, because this is a movie that has 2 very separate themes going on. You have the Maverick with Chuck Yeager, this guy who clearly wishes to be at the top of the pyramid. He wants to go to space, and he can't necessarily go, but he turns down, like, somebody wants all this money, and he even turns down more money just to do it. He just flies, he just does it. And the real Chuck Yeager said he liked Sam Shepard's performance here. He said it was like how he flew. He just was effortless. He just did it, not flamboyant. And that maverick component to this being juxtaposed with they wanted to build a team that they could kind of not necessarily control, but they wanted to tell them how it was going to go. And that team pushes back in the end, saying, we're not just monkeys. We want a window. We want a hatch. We're people, and I want some authorship of what I'm doing. I don't just happen to be writing in a metal box. But Chuck Yeager is, he is the one that Kaufman says had the right stuff. He was the one who was really pushing the envelope and, as the movie portrays at the end, to the absolute limits, with great courage. And that's not to take away from the Mercury 7, but that individual that's kind of America. Ron Howard said that in America, the system will achieve all this, but it also gives room in there for the individual to do great things. That is what is so cool about America. So you have room for Chuck Yeager to be a maverick. And then also the system can work together and still do what they did with the Mercury 7. And telling those two stories in parallel is telling two different aspects of what makes America and the space program so cool. Yeah, really, really well said. Great points all around, guys. I've got a lot to say about all of that. We don't have all day. But like you said, that's the genius, I think, of this screenplay is having these two stories running concurrently and then editing back and forth. It's no wonder why this movie won 4 Academy Awards, one of them being editing. And to be able to that walk that fine line and that tricky balance of giving enough attention to all of these wonderful cast members. And now, as an adult, Sam Shepard as Chuck Yeager just stands out so much. But I love the fact that you talk about doing 2 hours of research on each of these pilots and astronauts. I look up Chuck Yeager, just do it. In the research that Thomas Wolfe was trying to say in his book too is, and this comes down to the title, The Right Stuff, is what makes these men tick? Why is it they do what they do? What is their drive to take such risks, and what is the toll that takes? They feel the need for speed.
Yeah, speaking of Mavericks. Well, and it's that demon in the sky is what we get for the first 30, maybe 40 minutes of it, is that there's something out there that we're chasing. Then very quickly we are shown that that record stands for a hot second before it's broken.
Right.
I do appreciate that there are some movies that focus on, we did it. We did the one good thing, and we all cheer, freeze frame, and it's done. But then, no, that record won't stand. Now we're going for 2. Well, it's actually not 2. It's not Mach 2. It's actually Mach 2.3. Your Mach meter is going to read a little differently. And so we are pushing not just the envelope, but that we're moving the goalposts. We need to get to space. Well, now we need to put a man in orbit. This vanity of these test pilots, but the other people like them, we feel like these would be the good candidates for us to group together and send them up, even though we're calling them pilots, but originally they're not supposed to actually fly anything. I mean, Russell, like I said, we're not here to fix the movie, but the idea that it's a trilogy of you start with the maybe land speed, then airspeed, then you move to space, and then you move to the moon, I think that'd be perfect.
Absolutely. And we touched on it, but it's funny. It's so enjoyable to sit through. It's so enjoyable to sit through. The adrenaline cannot sustain a 3-hour movie because there's definitely some very tense moments. I think the Yeager scenes to me and the fighter jet are just absolutely gripping. When Gus Grissom's kind of reentry doesn't go very well, and you're also pretty worried for what's going to happen to John Glenn. You kind of know what's going to happen, but it doesn't take away the edge of the tension of the moment. And that's because they did a good job by telling you the story through the wives, that there's so much danger involved. You appreciate their bravery as they're doing it. And that makes the movie so gripping. But that can't sustain a 3-hour movie. The humor, to me, is what keeps you coming back over and over again, quoting it, thinking about it, and what will pull you through this 3-hour movie and is a very good bridge between these moments of action. Even the historical just conversations like, our Germans are better than their Germans, or, watching Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum recruit the Mercury 7. This is funny. Like, I mean,
right, it's comical.
There's laugh out loud moments here, and it's that's a big component to the enjoyment and what makes you stay seated throughout this movie, because it could get dry otherwise.
I almost feel as if the Chuck Yeager Edwards Air Base scenes have far less comedy than when we've got the group of guys together. Almost a tonal shift between when we're in this part where the back of the bar is of fallen fighter pilots. The only way to get on the wall is to die.
That's a good point.
I think the comedy really comes in once the director tells you, all right, an hour in, time to start a new movie. To keep you interested for this part, it's going to be funnier, which it is. To see a young Dennis Quaid, we mentioned Silverado earlier with the young Costner, and to see these actors who I had known for being more like middle-aged roles, to see them so young, he's comedic. They're all, the scenarios once we get the entire astronaut team together, I think is much more comedic. We return back to Earth figuratively, and much less comedic when it comes to Yeager and his scenes. That's just in retrospect.
That's a great observation.
Notion,
that's a great take. I couldn't agree more. And I give, again, so much credit to, because we're talking about the different elements of the filmmaking process here, and Phil Kaufman in his directorial efforts here, and the performance of Sam Shepard in particular with his storyline playing Chuck Yeager, just the gravitas that he carries. And I love it when a director allows the actor to and the actors look just in a look to do all the talking. This is not overwritten, and most of that storyline that carries such weight, the Chuck Yeager storyline, where it's like he's just risking his life every time he goes up in a rocket powered jet, by the way. It's all in his face. It says everything, and he's very understated. He gives an understated performance. And it's interesting when you talk about how then you have the camaraderie and the group aspect with the Mercury 7, and there's a little bit more levity and a little bit of comic relief there. And then you have these relationships developing, and you get involved, and you want to be, you start getting invested in those characters. It's great. But then to juxtapose that with this, like, kind of this lone adventurer, this flight jock kind of going on his own path, it's a great juxtaposition. And then you see, because of that, the Mercury 7 are going through a lot of that comic relief, I think you alluded to, Russell, comes from how they're looked at as kind of a joke in the beginning. They're not actually going into space yet. The monkey goes up before them, but they're just encountering issues. They don't have a lot of control. And along with them, you get the test pilots back at, with Chuck Yeager back at Edwards, kind of making fun of them. But as soon as those astronauts start going up, when Alan Shepard goes up and then Grissom goes up, and one of my favorite moments is when then you cut back to Sam Shepard, and they find a newfound respect for these guys that are actually taking the risks, because it's really happening at that point. It's a real credit to the writing and that balance and the back and forth between the storylines.
It's like a game recognized game. Listening to the radio, and they're thinking to themselves like, they're having all their fun, those monkeys, and then you see it on screen, the respect, fill them as they're listening, and I think that's led by Shepard's performance. That was
definitely a great moment for the film. In a movie that's chock full of great moments. For all the times we said that this movie could have gone on longer, there's a lot of times when you could have ended it too.
Yeah. Right? Well, because it's based on something that actually happened. We already knew what happened. We know that this is history. But even in my plot summary, I had to respect the interactions between the men chosen. And let's maybe just focus off the men for just a quick second. The wives, and I'm calling them wives because it's kind of all they are in this movie. But I think just the right attention, as far as more attention needs to be on their struggles, had this movie been more cheery or positive throughout, I think I would have liked it less. I need despair. I need tension. And this movie provides it to allow your emotions to kind of roller coaster a little bit.
You mean you don't want to watch 3 hours of guys masturbating while humming over top of each other in alternating stalls?
You act as if I don't do that every couple of days. But that comedy is great. But yeah, you really do need to see the turmoil, the inner, like inside the cookie cutter house turmoil, and we get just the right amount.
And that right amount was when she said, "You need to bring your wife in."
Oh, Nurse Merch.
Nurse Merch is like,
Nurse Merch,
right.
smoke show.
When she tells Gordon Cooper, "I'm going to need to meet your wife," because he has been super harassy and not nice to this poor nurse who's just trying to do her job, and she definitely calls his bluff and like kind of says like, "I'm gonna need to meet your wife," and like I loved seeing that trump card. That was one of those very humorous moments of like, that is fun. That is a very funny way to put somebody in their place.
No question. Yeah, it takes him down a notch there.
I think it was also a candidate for my shot of the movie when you see like his reflection in Nurse Merch's glasses as she stands up lording over him. Bring your wife in. Like
Yeah, the training sessions where they make you claustrophobic and like run sirens to make you flip out and the other guys are losing their cool and he's sleeping through it. The thing he's most afraid of is his angry wife. But you're right, though. The component of what the wives do, they humanize each of the male characters. In today's standards, the wives are there in order to develop the male character specifically, so they're not necessarily standing on their own as characters. But what they do is still very important in this. I mean, Barbara Hershey's character, I think those are some great scenes that she shares with Chuck Yeager.
Absolutely.
I don't want to just be with some has-been and like, you know, going around talking about the past. And she's a bit of a maverick herself. You can see why she's his riding partner on the horses. And like, this is part of who Chuck is through this character. Similarly with John Glenn and his wife, there's a real warm character in there. And, you know, his political nature comes through so much, but what humanizes him is how much he cares so much for his wife. She has anxiety that she's going to be interviewed on TV, and he won't let the vice president come in, even though he's put under great pressure. And a hilarious scene where they painted Lyndon Johnson out to be a goofball. I think that was such a funny scene, though, but also at the same time it was very tender as well to see those two there. And the danger of the movie is really pursued through Trudy Cooper. And
thank you absolutely. I was just going to mention her. Yep.
She was just so good at conveying what damages is that any day now her children's dad may just be gone, and she said like nobody ever says that 1 in 4 chance you might not come back. What is it that makes these guys wired like this?
Yeah, Russell, you just led me right into I want to go back to Pamela Reid as Trudy Cooper. Because that's such a wonderful scene, and it ties into what Dustin was saying about that balance and showing what the wives' roles were at this time. I think it's also a sign of the times, if you want to talk about female characters in movies, but just wives of pilots in particular. I could talk about my parents in particular, about how my mom was the stay-at-home mom, and she had to take care of myself and my sister, and she was really tough, while my dad was out there flying, and he was putting the food on the table, but he was out there taking risks, and it took an emotional toll on her. And she tried to put on a good face, but regardless, getting back to what you're saying, Russell, about, what is the right stuff and what does that mean? And, it's apparent that these men are consumed by this deep visceral passion, as if they're almost possessed, right? They're obsessed beyond committed to this chasing the demon, right? It will always be their first love, no matter the cost, which meant, not only potentially sacrificing their family or their time with their family or being there as a father, a husband, but ultimately for some it meant paying the ultimate price. Do you have the right stuff to actually continue taking those risks, pushing the outside of the envelope, right? And that's why we're here now, whether, I am not a fighter jock nor an astronaut. Watching this as an adult, though, I do have a better appreciation for what these men endured and what their loved ones endured. And I now have a better understanding of what my dad's love for flying meant. It was his everything. I can't undersell that. I can't give it enough due. He always said he was lucky because he got to do something he loved every day, and he was getting paid for it. But he would do it even if he didn't get paid for it, just like Chuck Yeager did. You see Sam Shepard talk about that in the early. I mean, what, he's getting paid $283 a month,
right?
Or something like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a crap about the money. So I see that same passion, like I saw in my dad. I still see in my dad when he talks about flying and flying in Vietnam, etc. I see that same passion in these characters, and now I have a better understanding of, oh, that's what it takes.
It's good that this movie's here, and I think it's holding up very well, because in an age where Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson are who goes to space, and how normalizing space travel is, we're on the precipice of space travel becoming the next yacht, if you will. Like that's the thing that the rich guys will do. Who knows? Families may take vacations to space station resorts and stuff in the future. It's nice to have
Lost
these little
in
isolated
paradise.
Yeah. It's nice to have these little isolated moments that remind you of how unknown and how scary it was.
The right stuff comes with a cost. Now, you mentioned the ultimate price, but the cost to these women at home, the kids, the constant fear. I thought that was important. In reference to your dad's passion of flying, it does make me think about, like, my friends who said, I'm going to work for NASA. I want to help us go to space. Somebody said, I'm going to get to Mars. I'm going to do that. And Chuck Yeager said, I'm going to chase that demon. And there are people who said, like your dad, I'm a man, but I want to fly. And to reach these goals is possible. I sometimes think about the astounding reaches that humanity has hit. And while we mentioned, like, Lord of the Rings, fantasy and adventure can be its own thing, but we as humans, we as Americans, have done stuff that was once thought wild imagination. And a movie, to put it together like this, it can't all be perfect. You have to show the cost.
That fine balance between the chase for discovery, exploration, what's out there, and then, but at what cost? And I love that scene where you've got, Cooper and Deke Slayton and Grissom all grilling out in the yard, and they're looking across the way, and they actually see Chuck Yeager and his family, and they're kind of staring back and forth from a distance, but looking at a jet flying over, and they're laughing and telling stories. And meanwhile, you have the wives and Trudy Cooper, who's literally suffering inside. This is all in one scene.
Yeah.
Talk about well done from a storytelling aspect, just showing all aspects in one scene, covering so much. And Trudy breaks down in a wonderful acting moment by Pamela Reid. I mean, she literally, talk about, like, really on the button with Gordon Cooper holding up the hot dog. His nickname is Hot Dog.
Hot Dog, yeah.
And he holds up a burning hot dog and shows it to his wife, who's losing her mind because that's the vision of what could be.
Earlier, I mentioned that the astronauts didn't necessarily like the movie. They were necessarily, a lot of them were nicer to the actors who were playing them. Scott Glenn initially considered for the role of Chuck Yeager, mentioned that he wanted to do Alan Shepard. Instead, he chose not to meet Alan Shepard, whereas most of the other actors chose to meet their real-life counterparts, and he just took an observation of his nuances by watching him in interviews and talking to other people. And Shepard wrote that Scott Glenn's performance was just spot on, and was really just nailed this, aside from not being as good-looking as he was. And Dennis Quaid, the producers discouraged the cast from, connecting with the real people, but Dennis Quaid reached out to Gordon Cooper and learned that, that they had lived a few miles from each other, and they became friends, and they, encouraged each other back and forth, and Quaid ended up getting his pilot's license and learned to fly in order to find that rush that you're talking about there, Jason. And so it's really interesting when you're doing a biopic, but if you're doing it of somebody who's alive, it does present a very interesting opportunity. It's a lot to live up to, because that person can literally walk into, Chuck Yeager was still walking into, like, Letterman, in the 80s off the heels of this movie. You're being compared to a real life walking, talking guy. And
true blue American hero.
Correct. And so that's quite a bit different than like when we covered Amadeus and you're playing Mozart. You know, it's a larger than life character, and that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. But here, it's a tough road to hoe because these guys are recorded on video in this time, and they are, and many people who were watching these movies at the time, in people's memory banks, and so you have to live up to somebody. I think that's a difficult thing. Like when Jesse Eisenberg did like Mark Zuckerberg, or whenever like, you know,
hey, throwback to Stand and Deliver when Olmos did Jaime Escalante. Like it's
exactly.
Yeah.
That's a difficult task as an actor, but it's also a really intriguing prospect. I think that would be a neat job as an actor to go in and do that. And so I thought that was an interesting thing. And Lance Henriksen, I mentioned it before. Why do you get such a good actor and like, you know, it's like the Mercury 6.5 for
criminally
this guy.
Underused.
I know. I expected at any point, like, are they just not putting him in this movie because he's afraid that his head's going to, like, you know, pop off and, like, spray milk all over the place with noodles on the floor?
I was going to say, come on, it's Bishop. Come on.
Yeah.
I love the Alien franchise connection.
Although another Aliens connection that I kept thinking of was like, Chuck Yeager wants to go to space pretty bad in this. I keep expecting him to pop out of the back seat of like, well, Alan Shepard's going up and like have him pop out and be like, have him pop out from the back seat. It's like,
you got any Beemans?
Yeah, you got any gum?
Yeah, one giant advertisement for Beemans chewing gum. I love it.
They were paid handsomely because everybody's chewing Beemans now.
Yeah, Beemans is riding that gravy train, brother.
So, what do you think? Okay, so Kaufman we talked about this. It's a big story to tell. Did you like these chapters? Like, they literally take black screen, white text, and they're covering a lot of time. Did you like how this movie was divided up and how the story was told, Jason?
I did. I love the concurrent storylines like we've covered, I think, pretty well at this point. You know, what are the big events? And I think they covered them well. I thought they were thorough. You know, to get the dates, to give it some perspective. This day, I love all the timestamps because when you're going back to 1947 and you're dealing with Chuck Yeager and just kind of the origins of this, which I think is very important that they incorporated that for another reason, because you've got to give it a knowledge. Where did this start? How long things took to develop. It gives you more of an appreciation. And I think from a storytelling aspect, as an audience member, you become more invested when you realize the expanse of time.
And I find it helpful, too.
Yeah, and you're changing location as well. And I got to say that they did a great job of taking the danger of the space exploration and then pivoting to the space race of the danger of letting this foreign entity who's fearful, like Russia, getting there before us and controlling space. Again, it wasn't just at the time a matter of who could do it first. There was a real fear of who could control that frontier, what would come from that. And that was put into this movie. And Kaufman wanted to make sure that this movie didn't go into, you know, unabashed patriotism. He was brought on, and as you mentioned earlier, there was William Goldman who had been hired by the producers to write the screenplay. And he took out, not only did he take Yeager out, but there was a strong focus on the group and through how great America is. And
patriotism,
Kaufman, yeah, exactly, patriotism. And he didn't want to make a film entirely about astronauts. He thought Yeager was the one who truly had the right stuff, and that he went back and he wrote the script and ended up being the director. He did not want that emphasis on patriotism in his version, and he put that Yeager part back in the film. And he thought that it was about the men and not so much about the system.
We're shown the things about the system that are negative. We're shown the invasive nature of the media. We're shown the pressure and like the smoky back rooms of both the political side and also Life magazine about the deal. The guy tells a man to his face that his name isn't good enough for the story. I think the things that are systemic are kind of shown to maybe not the thing that we're rooting for. Like, we're not rooting for the stars and stripes. We're seeing that, like, oh man, all these extra pressures are actually part of the system itself.
They demystified the fact that they were Germans who had come to America and to Russia to run both of these space programs. You know, that wasn't like hey, look at America. You know, I mean, you know,
our Germans are better than their Germans.
Yeah, I mean, that's a funny line, but it's also a telling point, you know? So I got to say, Kaufman had a good eye to the movie's pretty. I mean,
oh my goodness.
I forgot
Yes.
that we were watching a movie made in 1983. It's stylish like a 70s movie, and it's artistically presented like a 70s movie. But on the other hand, I feel like graphically what I'm looking at, and I feel like this is a newer movie than it is. I don't feel like I'm watching models of spacecraft.
No way.
At all.
No way.
And it looks better than CGI of the 90s or O's in many cases. These are models that they're using for this stuff. And they use real sky backgrounds a lot of the times. They would mix chemicals up and like Mr. Wizard chemicals and like blow them over across that or move these models on real fast in front of the camera. And it's amazing to me. This movie does not feel cheap. It does not feel like you're all of a sudden watching Team America, you know, like with
with strings and puppets.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like the old Flash Gordon serials. That's what you could actually see, the wires carrying the rocket ship across the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, when John Glenn's got the fireflies, as he calls them, or the sparks, like, you know, flying around, which was actually like ice condensate on the outside, like flaking off and then burning up. Which they didn't describe that in the movie. Maybe that's one of those science moments you would have liked to have just mentioned in there. You need
Absolutely.
You need VH1's pop-up video for the right stuff is what you need. What I was getting at is this is a pretty movie. It has nice transitions between shots. I mean, and there's moments where the camera lingers on the characters' faces in such a nice way. That weight that Dustin says that he needs, that despair that you need.
I do need it.
The camera does good work. The actors are doing good work in that moment, but the camera's doing it in the right way to elevate those moments and send that home to you. So it's a well shot movie. Did not win an Oscar for Best Cinematography, but rightfully nominated.
Caleb Deschanel shot this movie, and I mean, he goes up and he's still working. This guy ended up doing, like in more recent times, like National Treasure, Jack Reacher. I mean, this guy's a A-lister, a heavy hitter. He was actually married to Mary Jo Deschanel, who plays Annie Glenn, John Glenn's wife, and father of actresses Emily Deschanel and Zoe Deschanel. Yeah, this guy made the Mojave Desert look gorgeous. It's a desert. It looks beautiful.
I wanted to go to that cantina, and even though it's just like some plywood slapped together.
The happy bottom? Yeah, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I wanted to go see the wall too. You're right. Like this movie romanticized this very well.
Oh my goodness. When Sam Shepard walks up when he rides up on his horse to take a good look, a good gander at the Bell X1.
How good is that? That's the past.
That's one of my
looking
favorite
at the
scenes.
future.
When he dismounts, gets off his horse and walks around, or I think it actually does. He rides around, he rides around the Bell X1 for the first time. And you have the rocket firing off in the background. You just hear the rumble. And you feel it. You can feel it in your soul, the power of this like small rocket. But you see the sleek nature of it, and you're watching through Sam Shepard's reactions. And this, again, is not just a credit to the actor, but the camera is capturing it. The lighting is perfect. It's that golden hour. And he's riding around, just kind of cozying up to the jet. Kind of first, this is the meet cute, if you will. And just looking at it and saying, okay, nice to meet you, Bell X1. We're going to be friends, and I'm going to ride you, and we're going to do great things together. But he has to kind of warm up to it, cozy up to it. It just, and you sense there's a real relationship between the pilot and his aircraft.
The Edwards Air Force Base, I like the moment that they did for Trudy. I just said they got done romanticizing other things. Well, they actually did the opposite too. When they first moved in, it's all like white concrete block walls. It's super harsh, like the rusty water's pouring out of the bathroom. This is not a nice place for your family.
And speaking of atmosphere, Russell, yeah, well said. I mean, God, the ants on the sink. I love it. It's like the boys get to go play, and they've got to stay at home. You know, that's where she's got to live. Scott Glenn playing Alan Shepard. And being the first man into space, the whole sequence where we don't even know who the first American is going to be in space and how that's edited and how they hide his face. And that scene at night when he's first going out to the dock, where the rocket is, And you hear that there's something in the score and in the sound design where it's a very mechanical thumping. And it's in the background, and it's almost as if like this mechanical like heartbeat, but it creates this tense feeling. And you've got smoke going, you've got cameras going from the media, and you've got hoses popping out of the capsule as he's boarding the capsule. And it's all atmosphere, creating such a feeling of a holy, you know what, moment. Like this is for real, guys. And it's all practical effects too. Like you said, Russell, earlier, when it's models and things like that, this stuff looks so tangible.
Are wooden frame sets. That's amazing.
So
they don't
cool.
look like it.
No.
As a tool, the use of that pounding sound while they're on the platform or whatever it is that the
Thank you. The platform, yes.
That pounding sound, like as a tool, is used again, only this time with Shepard with Alan Shepard in the mission control when John Glenn is reporting back that he sees all the fireflies. And everyone in mission control knows that there's this impending problem with re-entry, and he's going to get burned up. The tool they use there is an incessant high-pitched beeping, as in like an alert sound. He's not currently in an alert situation. What this is doing is it's raising our tension level as the audience that something bad might happen here, and it gets you on the edge of your seat. The choice to add in that beeping sound could be put in anywhere or removed anywhere. It was just, once again, incredible sound design to add that in to make the tension seem more dire.
Yeah, well said. The other thing is any of the flight sequences, whether it be Yeager screaming, and I use that word purposefully, screaming through the air. I love the POV shots, by the way, going through the clouds because you feel like you're in the pilot seat. But it sounds as if the rocket-powered jet fighters are actually screaming.
And the music. I mean,
the
soundtrack on this is awesome. Both the instrumental score as well as their inflections of period piece music to add to this too. I mean, that ceremony scene with the dancer and the feathers with the American flag faintly lit in the background, and then flipping over to where Yeager is at the moment. I mean, it's just. These moments are elevated. Bill Conti's score won the Academy Award for Best Music and Original Score, and it is well deserved here. The music is just so powerful to not only anchor you to a time, but to a feeling and a range of feelings too. It's a difficult thing for a composer to do all the things that this movie does, just as difficult as it is for the actors and the directors. This movie does it all.
Claude Debussy, was it Claire de Lune during that dance on stage?
It sounds right to me.
If you say it more confidently, I'll believe you.
Yeah, so it was there was Debussy's Claire de Lune that they were doing on stage, and that's often like this. It's the same music that outside of Ocean's 11 when the fountains are going up. And what we're realizing is it's kind of like it's a beautiful song, but all the astronauts just kind of look at each other like, what are we here for? We're just looking at each other like, is this it? Like they're all thinking about going faster, going higher, pushing the limits more. But I just want to add this one about the soundtrack, which is when John Glenn is going up in his rocket, they start to play Holst's Mars, which is
I have it written down right here, Dustin. I love you for saying this.
So that they start to play Holst's Mars, and in my head, I'm sitting here on my couch, I go, Mars. This is like a song for war. They should really switch to Jupiter. That would be more appropriate. And they do. After like 20 seconds, they switch to Jupiter when he's actually ascending. I'm like, all right, read my mind. So like, might as well give you a half star for that right away.
Instant gratification. Now, you guys ready to hand out some awards here?
Let's do
Definitely.
it.
MVP, Jason.
Has to be Sam Shepard for me. Because upon this rewatch, he was the clear standout, and I think it was through his unspoken performance. It's in his eyes, it's in his facial expressions, it's in his celebratory howls after breaking the sound barrier. It's looking up at the moon, yearning for more, wanting to be an astronaut potentially, but it's his simple delivery. It's his, Sam Shepard is. I just still, for the life of me, do not understand why he was not another Harrison Ford. The man was so immensely talented because we're talking about a playwright and a director. And
well, I think he had. I think that's it. I think he had his eyes set somewhere else. I mean, he's described as like as far as modern playwrights, the best.
I think
we
it was
ever
confusing
had.
for people because Shepard was Yeager, Glenn was Shepard, and Harris was Glenn.
And
they got through with this movie and they said, "Get me Shepard," and they said, "Glenn, no, get me Harris."
So true.
Not Harris. Yeager.
I mean, Glenn.
Shepard, no.
John.
MVP Dustin.
I'm going with Ed Harris as John Glenn. I feel like when we made our pivot to movie within a movie, but just the focus on the team, I think that we aren't told that he's like the leader. The group, the group dynamic kind of raises him up in mostly positive, but in the slightly the combative way of when his character is written to have a moral problem with some of their actions. But even still, seeing like Ed Harris young and the portrayal of this guy who's very clearly a hero was really well done. So he's getting my nod.
They do set him apart, though. Like, they give him, like, a bow tie, whereas everybody else up there has a straight tie. Everybody else has, like, dark grays and navy blue jackets on. He has a very light gray jacket. He's positioned in the center. I mean, there's a lot of, like, they're doing that on purpose to push him forward. Like, there's every little conscious decision is focusing you on that. So that's not just you.
But
like,
even
that was an
before
intention.
Yeah, but even before that, it's sort of like when they're going through the trials and they're like, oh, we're competing against Archie and Jughead, the two guys at the end who are like, it's almost as if it's not just us who are being directed. It's the group in total is kind of agreeing that this guy is standing up, aside from the director's choices.
I'm with Jason on this one with Sam Shepard, but just for kicks, I'm going to just give a nod to Dennis Quaid as well as Gordon Cooper. He was a lot of fun in this. Best Supporting Actor, Jason.
I'm going to go with Fred Ward as Virgil I. Gus Grissom. I just love Fred Ward. There's something very sympathetic about him as an actor and a character, something relatable, very human, very everyman. He's got some wonderful lines. He provides some of the comic relief levity in this film. His signature phrase, F&A, Bubba. You just can't get enough of that.
I appreciate that he said that you could be shorter and be an astronaut. He's a good bit shorter than everybody else in the lineup of the movie.
Right. But he still stands out.
Yeah. No, if I had been him on the day of the set, I was like, can you give me a box and just shoot us like from the knees up, please? Dustin, who is your best supporting actor?
We'll go with Scott Glenn as Alan Shepard. I thought his portrayal was... now, the character written wise was a little, I don't know if I got right away this fascination with this comedic, like Latino space, like spoof spaceman on TV and how much the character liked it. That he had a sense of humor. People would talk to him, like they'd call him hombre or amigo. Like part of that didn't make sense for me, but I felt like his presence kind of owned the screen when he was shown. I think he was sort of if John Glenn in this movie is the Boy Scout leader, then to me like Alan Shepard was kind of like the biker gang street tough leader. Like you need different forms of leadership, and I think that for some reason Scott Glenn, and maybe it's because 2 years later Desperado, maybe it's because I most recently saw him in that, but I feel like he's got this kind of rough and tumble authority to him. It seems like his strength exudes beyond just the character. So for me, it's Scott Glenn.
Great choice. And I like the funny guys. I like Jeff Goldblum and Harry Shearer for going and recruiting these guys and being completely out of their element. And like, are there snakes here? Are there or like vomiting, like actually wiping vomit off their face on the aircraft?
That was hard to watch, actually.
I got a kick out of these guys, and when they left the movie, I was a little bit sad. And like, I liked their whole like spiel, like there are some men that we think could be good for this application, and like absurd. Like,
Yeah.
how do you
Trapeze
interview to be
artist.
an astronaut? That was a funny scene in its own right. So these guys were a lot of fun. Hidden gem, Jason.
I'm going with Pamela Reid as Trudy Cooper. I didn't realize or remember how impactful her role is in this movie and how important it is to. I think Veronica Cartwright also is great in this as excuse me,
Grissom's
Mrs.
wife?
Grissom.
Yeah.
But Pamela Reid has a little more to do, I think, and it's. She's adorable, and again, I just extremely empathetic, and it was something I was much more aware of her and her performance this time around.
Kevin Pollak is actually the voice of President Dwight Eisenhower in this movie. So shout out to Kevin Pollak there.
Wow.
Yeah,
Is that your hidden gem? Is this someone we don't even see?
that's right.
Nice. For me, I'm going to stick with the wives, and it was hard not to go Veronica Cartwright for me because I knew that we would bring up Trudy Cooper. But I'm going to go with Kathy Baker as Louise Shepard, specifically because I know that face, like the face I know that from, I think many would know, is from Edward Scissorhands as being kind of the lusty neighbor. And like to me, I mean, she's kind of a pseudo villain in that movie, and I've seen that movie 100 times. So to see her in a different role, I think this is actually her first role, and to have a first role when you're not a young, like completely young star, is kind of cool. So that's my hidden gem. Even though I was kind of torn between her and Mary Jo Deschanel as Annie Glenn, I'm going to give the nod to her just because I've seen her in other stuff.
And we should mention Veronica Cartwright's yet another Aliens crossover.
Yeah, absolutely.
So recast, if you had to recast somebody and put somebody in their place, Jason, who would it be?
I would probably recast the chief scientist, who was played by Scott Beach, and he was serviceable. He was fine. I thought maybe someone with a little more gravitas. You know, I was thinking a couple different names, but I ended up on Max von Sydow, maybe, who played a German officer in Victory, another one of our great 80s sports movies.
He's Father Merrin from The Exorcist.
The Exorcist, yeah.
Absolutely. Good old Max von Sydow. So that would have been cool maybe to see him in a scientist role.
Dustin, recast.
For me, I actually liked how Scott Pauline did Deke Slayton, but I was just thinking of Matthew Modine in there.
Oh, wow.
And honestly, because we had, I would say, maybe one totally underused, but maybe two roles in the seven that could have been elevated, I think Matthew Modine's the guy to do it. But it's not like I watched this and said they need it. But I actually, if I have to like punch a ticket, I'm going to jump on Jason's choice because that's a great choice.
I think Charles Frank as Scott Carpenter gets lost in the mix.
Yeah.
Very forgettable. In fact, just by virtue of Lance Henriksen being Lance Henriksen, and even though his role is barely mentionable in the movie, but because that's Bishop, I remember that more. So I'm going to try and remember Scott Carpenter a little better by putting Kurt Russell in there.
Ooh, wow.
Nice.
Good. That's great. Well, I want to see Kurt Russell in everything, so I'm biased.
Yeah.
Because this movie needed more testosterone.
There's the answer. I asked in the beginning. Yeah. Yes. It
did need more, and it needed Kurt Russell. Yeah.
That's the answer.
Best shot, Jason.
For me, it is Yeager walking away from the crash with his face scarred, literally charred, while he's chewing his Beeman's gum. It's the hero shot. I love it because we all too often see the hero walking like in front of the explosion or away from a crash of some kind.
Cool guys don't look at explosions.
This is
That's the rule.
This is the best for me. Love that moment. That's my best shot.
Yeah. Dustin, best shot.
Both of mine are despair shots. Sorry, guys. This is just what
Why
I
don't you
need.
just bring us down a little bit here,
This
Dustin?
is just what I absolutely look for in movies. Both of mine. Since it was brought up earlier, I'm gonna toss away my previous choice was Trudy Cooper walking through the very sad house with the plane sounds overhead, and she's like, "Oh, this is my life now. I live here." And instead, I'm gonna switch to my backup, which was when Gus and his wife are embracing, in their little bungalow across from the worst beach in Florida. She was the one who was saying, like, the military owes me. The military's got to make good. And obviously Gus is the one who was kind of pegged as, screwing the pooch. And she didn't get, prior to that shot, she didn't get to meet Jackie O. She didn't get the big fanfare. And so now they're just holding each other, both of them not getting exactly what they wanted out of this. And that's the shot that kind of made this a complete experience, is that, wow, this is how... And they've got reporters outside dying to talk to them, but they're just both kind of holding each other in, like, just a little bit of a downturn of emotion for the movie. I thought it was necessary and beautiful.
Not getting what they wanted out of it is a very good way of putting it. And that was palpable there for sure. For me, my best shot is going to be the transition. You have Yeager, he's drinking a glass and a plane is taking off at dawn. And it's a great cut. It's the past moving into the future. It's just, the horse shot when he was on a horse looking at the plane was good, but I like this transition as things just fade out really well. So
it's a great call.
I'm a sucker for a good transition.
Yeah. I have to say this, too. It's tough to compete also with the ultimate hero shot of the Mercury 7 walking down the platform.
Mm-hmm. That's probably
that is the shot,
that's
right?
probably the shot.
That's the one everybody would...
Yeah,
they got to say.
Yes.
But when they kind of move into silhouette, though, when they're in the foreground, it's pretty tight.
It's good lighting. For sure.
Yeah.
Like you don't just see their faces coming at you the whole time. You're right. It's I think every superhero ensemble movie took notes from that and did that. Like the X-Men are walking towards you. I think they took it from this movie.
Armageddon is
yes.
pretty positive, right? All right.
Prove me wrong. Is there do people dramatically walk towards the camera earlier than this? Like this? Is this the first time we do that?
That's a great question.
This might be the one.
This might be where it begins. Write into me and tell me I'm wrong if you need to, but so if there's a movie in 1930 clickety-clack, then, then the Marx Brothers were working at the camera heroically. Best scene, Jason.
Okay, this is interesting because Dustin brought this up earlier and he had a completely different take than I have on this scene. This has always been my favorite scene since I was a kid. When the Mercury 7 have arrived now in Houston towards the end, and it's during the barbecue celebration while the dancer with the feathered fans, the scantily clad dancer is performing. And we have a very flamboyant Vice President Johnston doing a speech, etc. This particular scene being juxtaposed against Yeager attempting to break the altitude barrier. But that scene during the barbecue celebration in Texas, in Houston, when we have the Mercury 7 seated watching the show, Dustin had a different take on it, which I find fascinating and interesting. My take on it personally was that each of them during the wonderful classical song, I guess Claire de Lune is what we agreed it was, is that we see the connection. This is for me, this is my interpretation, is that the Mercury 7, they each feel the weight of the moment. They don't care about the pomp and circumstance. That I will agree with Dustin on. However, they look at each other and understand where they were, where they've come, what this means, and that it's a moment. Again, I love these unspoken moments, guys. It's just wonderful direction, wonderful acting, and they look at each other and they kind of know. They all have the right stuff, and they did it together. I think, to be honest, Ocean's 11 steals that.
Yes, they do.
Probably unapologetically. It's a good moment to steal. It's the same thing. That's exactly what they do at the end of Ocean's 11 in front of the fountain, right, guys? They look at each other going, hey, we pulled it off. We pulled this off. We did it.
It's a very good scene. Dustin.
And they did it their way.
Right.
I actually want to talk about that Texas scene just a little bit, about the things that are accurate, I guess we'll say. LBJ actually went to the school in the university in the town that I live, Texas State University, at the time known as Southwest Texas State University. He's kind of the big pride of the town I live in. And I love that he's portrayed in such a kind of comical way in this movie. There's no way they have that much corn for that particular barbecue. They might have steak. It's probably brisket instead. But we all know that a cookout like that in Texas is going to have onions. It's going to have pickles. It's going to have coleslaw. There's no way they could grill that much corn. That corn is also obviously very under-seasoned. That being said, because that's a big white barbecue also, by the way. The only Latino we have is portrayed by the great Anthony Munoz, potentially the best offensive lineman to ever play, who is one of the orderlies. Now that I got the Texas stuff out of the way, my best scene is actually that first press conference with the Mercury 7, where we're kind of getting we're smushing all this stuff together. All right, they've beaten the training, they're all there, and they're all dressed a little differently. We do get our first glimpse into John Glenn as becoming the verbal leader. The other guys are maybe starting to look up to him as this kind of Boy Scout hero kind of guy. You have the wives sitting there. You have the media there. I just thought that was a cool turning point from the movie. But my favorite is the first press conference.
My best scene is actually the same as Jason's, but for diversity's sake, I want to give a nod to the German scientists having a showdown with the astronauts of whether they get a hatch or not. It's the moment where the astronauts establish themselves, they've come together. This is the uniting thing that Grissom pulls out there and really pulls everybody together when they're kind of very competitive. They're coming from different backgrounds. They're coming from different parts of the country. They're just but they want to be pilots, not dummies. So that scene to me is funny, but also it's kind of powerful when you actually go back and think about what it does. That's the moment they're really galvanizing together.
No Bucks, no Buck Rogers.
No Buck Rogers. Yeah.
Best wardrobe or makeup moment, Jason?
I am going to go with our guy Chuck Yeager once again when he walks out in his flight suit, ready to get onto the jet and break that altitude barrier. Because in the moment in the film, we know he's gearing up for it. And to be completely transparent here, and to be honest, this was not an impromptu moment in the actual history. These flights were scheduled and planned, but it's great for drama when we know Yeager's eyeing that record. So that's my wardrobe moment.
That's a great one. Dustin, best wardrobe or makeup moment?
I almost went with Yeager too, but I think for me it's all it's our Mercury 7. Whenever they're in mission control, they're all wearing a very simple of the time period, white shirt and simple tie. It's kind of cool to see. This is almost as if they're non-active wear, because they're in these space age suits, we'll say most of the time. But when they're just in mission control, they're all just kind of buttoned up, straight laced. Some of them do have a different tie, but that was something that just kind of stood out to me. So that's my choice.
Yeah, and to create those astronaut uniforms, they used silver fabric that were leftover materials from the costumes from the singer Cher and her stage props. So,
wow, love it.
Yeah, yep. If you could turn back time, you could be an astronaut. So, but my moment for this category needs to go to Chuck Yeager's leather jacket.
Oh, of course. Jeez, well done. Well played.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Is there anything better than just make this character? Change one thing, and only one thing. I think Dustin's is the barbecue, but Jason, what about you?
You know what? I was going to defer to you, Russell, because I have a feeling I know what yours is, and I don't want to step on it just in case. So why don't you go, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So Gus Grissom's panicking at the landing is something that they made a bold decision and took a stance on.
Yeah.
And this is one of the big things that the Mercury 7 astronauts really didn't like. They criticized the focused portrayal of him flipping out and as he was having a splashdown landing. And historians and engineers who have worked for NASA have since generally considered that the explosive bolts were a mechanical function and not an error on Grissom's part. It was left to be murky, and it didn't paint him in the best of lights, and especially given, like Dustin said, they didn't do you right. I feel like that weight comes more if you go ahead and have it be unexpected. And I felt like that part of this movie, Luckily, it does get lost in the soup because there's so much soup. But I didn't like what they did there. And it's a bold decision to make, and it doesn't sound like it was necessarily even an accurate decision to make. So if you were to director's cut this, maybe fix that scene.
Couldn't agree more with you, Russell. Yeah, I it's unfortunate because even as a kid watching this, I felt that entire sequence was gut-wrenching for the character. It was upsetting, especially then, the scene afterward, and there's just no pomp and circumstance almost for him, and they're in the hotel, and oh, great, we have a stocked fridge. And Mrs. Grissom, Veronica Cartwright, so good at playing that type of despair, was just upsetting. And then to find out it's actually not true to fact, according to the research, and that they did retrieve the Liberty Bell, that capsule, in 1999, which is something we don't think about either. Something like that sinks to the bottom of the ocean. How many miles deep is it? And it takes years upon years in order to retrieve that piece of equipment, which they finally did in 99, only to prove once again
that Chuck Yeager was here first.
Right.
No handball in this area.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, all those Chuck Yeager type of jokes.
The gum from Chuck Yeager was stuck to the ceiling, and that's how we knew he was there.
But they retrieved, in 99, they retrieved the Liberty Bell, Gus Grissom's capsule, and that to prove that there was a mechanical malfunction. It was not human error. So, and then, of course, it being unfortunate that, Grissom passed away, obviously, before this movie ever came out. So it's a tough look, that part.
It is. And we talked about there's inaccuracies abound. This is a bold decision. And this is not one you want to be wrong on like that. So, Dustin, how about you? Is it too much corn, or is there something else you'd rather change?
All right, they did show that one plate had a pat of butter on it, but there's absolutely no color on that corn. You want some elote style, little cilantro, little cotija cheese. You want a little good corn, and not just butter and salt. That wasn't it. You actually brought it up, Russell. My change one thing. I wrote it. It's, 5 words. Separate this into 2 movies? ? And I don't know if I love my choice here, but the idea is I think that if we went sort of your trilogy way, where we have like the land or airspeed barrier, then we have getting to space, then we have going to the moon. If we could keep this group together and make it work contract style, I think that is wonderful and a box office blowout. I think it's awesome. Instead, what we get are 2 movies that, if we did separate them, I think standing alone, they're not incredible to me. I think this movie is greater than the sum of its 2 parts, if you were to think of it as 2 parts, and I do. So if I had to change one thing, I would want just the Chuck Yeager movie, and I would want just the Mercury 7 movie. And these 2 movies, these 2 parts really complement each other, and I think are necessary. But I think that's my change one thing, is to pull this out further, perhaps the way that they're doing with this Disney Plus show, kind of stretch it out and then segment it, because I think that's kind of would lead to greater success. My change one thing isn't always change one thing to make it more financially successful, but I think that would happen with this, and I think maybe it would have made its budget if that were the case. But I'm talking a lot about like the hypotheticals here, the counterfactuals. Still stood up as a great movie. I think that could be done, and you brought it up earlier, so I'm going to stick with it.
Jason, what's your best quote from this movie?
It's when Chuck Yeager and his buddies, I believe they're all still working with the Air Force in some way or another. Chuck Yeager in that seems to be like a break room with his fellows. I think Ridley is there as well, and they're watching the media coverage, and they're having a little fun at the expense of Gus Grissom. And that's when, probably somewhat unexpectedly, because you would think Yeager would kind of join in with the mockery, but he doesn't. He takes the opposite stance, and he says, because they talk about, monkeys could do this job. It's been proven. These pilots are just basically test dummies.
Oh, I see where you're going now.
And then Yeager stands up for all the astronauts and says, monkeys, you think a monkey knows he's sitting on top of a rocket that might explode? These astronaut boys, they know that, see? Well, I'll tell you something. It takes a special kind of man to volunteer for a suicide mission, especially one that's on TV. Oh, Gus, you did all right. That's my best quote right
Great.
there.
Incredible.
Good one.
Love that one.
Dustin, best quote.
I, for one, do not intend to go to sleep by the light of a communist moon. I thought it was poetic in the middle of those dark scenes where they're doing the slideshows. And those scenes are chaotic, which is fun. You've got one of the senators like crawling around on the floor trying to plug in something. It actually made me laugh out loud when I was watching it. So that's mine.
Absolutely. Mine's going to be, hey, Ridley, you got any Beemans? Yeah, I think I got me a stick.
Yeah.
Loan me some, will you? I'll pay you back later. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's good.
Great stuff. Love how that's repeated throughout.
This is the moment where we got to come down to the fire. But before we give our ratings, Jason, tell people where we can hear more from you on the All 80s Movies podcast.
Hey, thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this. You can find the All 80s Movies podcast on our podcast network partner site, Ship It Studios, at shipitstudios.com/All 80s Podcast, as well as most streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, and so on and so forth. Please rate, review, and subscribe. We do appreciate the support from our listeners and also the podcast community as a whole. And we hope to return to the favor by having guests on our podcast soon, such as yourselves, Russell and Dustin.
Whoa, that would be cool.
That'd be awesome.
A movie podcast going on another movie podcast? That would be cool.
What?
Now, on a 5-star scale, half-star intervals, Jason, I'm putting you in the hot seat. What's it going to be?
I'm going for it. I'm going all the way.
Oh,
I'm pushing the outside of the envelope. I'm going to give it a 5. To think that this film was a bomb, I don't know what that says at this point. Not much to me, personally. It makes sense maybe because of the time, because you have Return of the Jedi coming out this year, Juggernaut. But still, the Academy Awards, the nominations speak for themselves. I mean, 8 nominations. It wins 4, all well-deserved. What a brilliant ensemble cast.
I don't think its grossings are bad. I just think that they spent a lot of money, so they have to recoup it.
That's a good point. Absolutely.
I don't think that it actually was bad. They just wanted more people to come than did.
True. But
Producer
Dustin
Dustin says, what if all those tickets were times 2?
There you go. Now we're thinking. But yeah, just to cap it off, the justification for a 5-star rating is just from all the technical aspects. This entire film is a balancing act of so many elements, and it does so almost flawlessly. So 5 stars for me.
Great choice. Dustin, are you going to break through the demon that holds you back at 4.5 stars? They said it couldn't be done.
I super enjoyed this movie, and I think the movie must exist in the form that it does. It can't be shorter. It must be in this sort of director's cut length, and I'm not gonna dock it for its length by itself. But for me, this is a 4-star movie. Incredible, far above average, and a stellar cast. I really enjoyed essentially all of the performances. There were a couple things that did leave me questioning. I think we got enough, we got almost the perfect amount of what I mentioned earlier, like the despair or the not making good or the military owes me, which sometimes we don't get a lot in movies. I thought that was good, but so I don't think we needed the attention on, we'll say, Gus Grissom's foul up, and we all lingered on that a little bit during the show. I also feel as if like I said, the movie has to be in this form that it's in order to contribute to the meaningfulness of the main focus, which is on the Mercury 7. But I still feel as if this would be better served separated somehow. And then finally, for all the length they decide to keep in, it ends abruptly. And I'm gonna say, when you throw in a country western voiceover to just end the movie 20 seconds away from a launch, it seemed as if like, well, we already are in for 3 hours and 15. Why can't we end this better? Now, I'm really not trying to hate on the movie that much. It still deserves every ounce of that 4-star. The things that to me, the ending kind of, if you've got all the time and you've got the budget, I don't know how it could have been ended better, but to end it so abruptly with voiceovers seemed like the work of an inferior director. As if like, what happened? Who ended this movie? It wasn't Kaufman.
The producer came in and said, "Kaufman, you're out of money." Like,
yeah.
No, I got a little bit more. Just give me another week.
Yeah.
Nope, you're out of here.
No, I came into the podcast today with 4 stars, and actually after talking about it so much, I thought to myself, after talking about how much I enjoyed it and listening to both of you, I thought to myself, does this bump up to 4.5? And I'm just going to stick with the 4. Still very enjoyable to watch.
Holding steady. Yeah, and I'm going to be at 4.5, and it is probably because this is a new movie to me, because if I have a chance to return to this one again, it's probably going to elevate over time. I do think that there are just these little things, like whether it be the Grissom thing, or whether it be how the wives are only in service of their male counterparts, or the shift in tone is quite dramatic a number of times throughout this, and these are things that could be alleviated by breaking it up into more movies and just wanting more. They left me wanting more, which is something you should do, but on the other hand, I wanted so much more that, like you said, Dustin, why don't we not just go to the moon, or like get it? Like, I mean, I think the Grissom thing needs to be in there. So I realize that there's the constraints of what people will sit in the movie theaters, but you know, if Scorsese can make a 4-hour-long Irishman movie, I'm up for it. I'll sit through a 4th hour of the right stuff. Absolutely. And I'd rather do that than sit through 4 hours of The Irishman. Well, it
doesn't have to be like a series like how we have modern. I mean, I don't know what form it can be in. Like, I'm not offering a solution to my criticism. Whatever it is, it seems.
It is not a 45-minute musical Christmas special, though. I'll tell you that.
We'll pass on that. But yeah, it's almost hard to put our finger on, but it's something there that like it could have been more.
Gentlemen, if you'll allow me, I think I have to change my rating. I think I got a little excited with the 5 stars. I think I gotta take it back. And if this were being rated purely on technical, I think I probably would stick with a 5. But I said it myself. I had issues with the Gus Grissom take, and I do have an issue with the abrupt ending as well. Yeah, I gotta do it. I gotta change to 4.5. I gotta be able to look at myself in the mirror here on this. Also, I just want to give a shout out to the Tom Hanks produced limited series From the Earth to the Moon. If you're looking for an outstanding series, you can watch it right now on HBO Max. I'm not being paid by HBO Max to say that, unfortunately, but I was a huge fan of that series. And if you want to get
he appreciates that. He's a big fan of the show, Tom Hanks.
In-depth look at the Apollo program, you get a little more of that.
I hand up my 5s a little bit easier, so you're getting no rebuttal from me. I'm not being too harsh on you. I think Ebert gave this his full 4 out of 4 and said this was the best movie of the year and one of the top 10 movies of the 80s. So you're not out of line.
Right.
Dustin, do you want to help me pick a movie for next time?
Let's do it.
So option 1 is going to be The Blow Up from 1966. A fashion photographer unknowingly captures the death of a film after following 2 lovers in the park. Option 2. The Conversation from 1974. A paranoid, secretive surveillance expert has a crisis of confidence when he suspects the couple he is spying on will be murdered. And option 3, Eyes Wide Shut from 1999. A Manhattan doctor embarks on a bizarre night-long odyssey after his wife's admission of unfulfilled longings.
Ooh, you had me at paranoid. Option 2, The Conversation.
All right. And thank you, Jason, for coming on the show. We really enjoyed having you here. And everybody go check out his work on the All 80s Movies podcast. It's very enjoyable.
Hey, guys, it was a real pleasure. It was nice to meet you both and to be able to, just to work alongside you. I, would come back in a heartbeat. I love what you do here at the Retro Movie Roundtable. And again, I hope to have you join Bill and I on our podcast someday.
And to all the listeners, subscribe, rate, and review. Do all those wonderful things that these really help us out. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @movie_retro and email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. And check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contributions will go towards making the show better for you, the listener. As always, thank you for listening. be good to each other, and watch more movies. Dustin?
I know very well what you represent. You represent the idiocy of today. You are a part of a league of morons. Oh yes, you see, you're one of the morons I've been fighting my whole life.